Hey everybody, can you all hear me okay? Okay, awesome. Hi, welcome to this panel discussion and launch for the Stud Pin Archives. My name is Jeanne Vaccaro. I'm really delighted to be Barbara Waltering today for Chloe Miller from the Stud Pin Archives and Chris and Rhea from Land and Sea Press. Yes, let's do it. The book is out and you can actually go find it at booth number...
Q20?
Number Q. 20.
Number Q20, yeah.
And so we're going to kind of talk through the origins of the project and talk about the Stud Bar. I wonder how many of you have been to the Stud? Okay, great.
No.
It's the dedicated fans here. So you want to...
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay, yes, the original location on Folsom. So as many of you know, the bar was established in 1966. Right before, actually after the
it was the end of May of '66, and Compton's riot happened in August of '66. So
yes.
Just for some context, and Stonewall, of course, was in 1969. So it's like this early moment of San Francisco.
This early moment and this gay hippie moment as well. So it was like where all of the gay hippies would come to dance, and it was pre-leather. The pre-leather bar scene, it had just started, and it was iconic, and it was a place to be. It was like the mud club of the West Coast, and everyone that worked there at that time would tell me the craziest stories of Etta James, of Sylvester, and 2 Tons Fun, and how amazing it was, and how beautiful it was to be in a place where not only men were, but where women were, where everyone who wanted to be anybody could be, and it was a place where everyone could be free. And there was only a couple other places like that. It would be the I-Beam and Oasis, and those were the people that would basically, it was for us. So I'm just going to go real brief and real broad strokes because I feel like I can go origin story for a million years. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide, which is Paul Gidget Sinclair, who created these amazing pinbacks that I'm obsessed with. They worked at both locations. They are an icon, I think. They had created over 250 buttons and pinbacks, and you name it, they are hilarious. And they tell a story of the timeline of the stud. I'm just going to keep it going. And this whole archive is here because of Ben Fiesta Gabord, who is also they're super important in this whole story because this is how the archive came to be, because all of the stuff was found in the basement of the stud and it was left by him. So
do you want to tell a little bit the story of, and also for the folks who haven't seen it, there's a great on YouTube little 10-12 minute video from 1982 where you can see some of these folks sort of talking about like lighting candles and like setting the mood, and how this kind of spirit of free love and not this kind of, single gendered or like sex segregated queer space was kind of coming to be. So just to get to see some of these folks also talking in their own words and talking about setting the mood of the night. Totally. And this is kind of the space that you entered into. And so tell us the story of you being at the Stud. You were a bartender.
So I was a bartender at the Stud, and where my well was situated was right across the way from all of these buttons, along with Ben's picture and Gidget's picture and like polka dot prom pictures. Everyone's picture was like directly across. And I was like, who and what are these buttons? I'm like, this is amazing. And one of the owners of the Stud, Rachel, was like, oh my God, there is like a satchel of them down in the basement. Let me go grab them for you. And so she basically grabbed the satchel, and she also found a shoebox as well. So those were like hundreds of them. And so these are some of the buttons that we found. Super fun, really silly, especially the Merry Christmas. I'm like, who? The iconic Trans-American building. That's like, I love that one. That's like the San Francisco site that you would see coming over the hill. Of course, you have Wizard of Oz. I feel like San Francisco is Oz. Yeah, and then so on the far left, you see a man over there, and that's Larry LaRue. And he is the longtime DJ at Stud Bar, and they were also an owner until they passed away.
And in this video that you should all watch on YouTube immediately when you leave here, Larry is like playing records and saying, you know, I was hired for my good taste, but sort of like acting as though people on the dance floor didn't have the same kind of taste. But tell us a little bit about who made the pins and like how the designs came about and how they were maybe distributed to folks.
Yeah, so you can tell who made the, like, by the pin backs. So this G on each button, that's Gidget. That's Gidget's signature. And they, like, basically for Folsom Street Fair, you would get a button if you came to the bar. If you were at the anniversary party, you would get a button. And then if you would sometimes you would see a rhinestone one, and that was for the workers. And those were where you get to drink top shelf. And I'm sure, like, everyone probably drank top shelf anyways. But that was, like, the indication of, like, you get to drink free all night. Yeah.
And I think when we were talking, you know, originally we were sort of thinking about these pins are really tiny, you know, and thinking about them as this like form of flagging, and even flagging to get a free drink or flagging just for whatever it might be, to kind of have people find one another in a space.
Completely. And I feel like all of us flag in some way. Like, you may think I'm gay because of my haircut, you know what I mean? But there's like certain ways that we all flag for each other, and like we see each other as one, you know, that we're like, oh, we're in like minded space. So I feel like if I saw somebody wearing that Stud smiley face, and I'd be like, you are definitely my friend, you know, that would call to me from across the room. Yeah. Okay, so this is a polka dot prom dance card, and this is the front of it, and this is the inside of it. And then, as you can see on the left-hand side, it has a rhinestone, so it was actually a Stud bartender's button. And then on the side, you see Larry LaRue's signature on the bottom. And all of these people all worked at the Stud that have signed this, which I think is really special. This is a picture from the Polka Dot Prom. As you see on the bottom, this is Ben Fiesta Gabord, and the bottom middle. I'm not sure who the three folks on the top or the two on the side, but it's a great picture, and it kind of just shows you the liveliness of the party.
And these photos were all a part of the stuff you found in the basement.
Mm-hmm. And moving on, this is Larry LaRue in the DJ booth, which was at the original Stud, and it was actually in the well between two buildings. So it was very ramshackled. And this is Diana King, who was the first woman DJ to be at the Stud, and also somehow got 3 nights DJing at the bar because Larry LaRue did not want any competition. So that's how she got in, and she didn't realize, like, oh my God, this is like she hit gold, basically. These 2 buttons are Larry LaRue, and this is also Larry LaRue and Ben Younger, their photo booth pictures, which are very sweet. And you can see Gidget made the one on the left, and I believe that they probably made the one on the right as well. And this is one of the first female bartenders, Maya Novelli, with Jim Edie Fleckenstein. Jim was actually Larry LaRue's partner. And when they passed, the ownership went on to Larry LaRue.
When you were finding these photographs, did you know already who these people were, or did you have to do some kind of reconstructing work to piece it together?
I had to do some work to kind of piece it together through my contacts,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How did you go about doing that?
I found out, I kind of went on the Stud Bar Facebook page, which is all old stud workers, and I kind of would just like be very annoying and reach out, and they're like, "Who is she? Why is she asking me so many questions?" And I actually became friends with John Klaus, and they were my main contact until they passed away of cancer. But they were so forthcoming with so much information, and it was just really a sweet thing. This also was found. I found 2 Rolodexes, and this is like, there's so much other good names and numbers than that, but I just kept it real PG. So this is the Etta James, along with the flyer for her.
Can you give us, just among friends, like any other names we might want to know about from the Rolodex?
Sylvester. There's somebody that like fell in the basement, and they're like known as like basement guy or something. You know what I mean? There's a lot of just like silly names, and then also some really serious ones like SF General, the AIDS ward, and some others. Yeah. Through this project, I wanted to keep it contemporary, so I would ask my friends to be inspired by the pinbacks and create new merch for the stud as well. So when we all kind of took the stuff from the basement is when the stud actually closed too, and so it was during COVID when the bar was shut. And we were just like, I do not want this to go to an institution because we were afraid that it would just be lost. And you know, most museums, the best stuff is behind the wall or in the basement. So I think that's why we all kind of held on to everything. So on the bottom is Manuel Paul, who is actually an LA artist. And on the right side is Vivi Forevermore and Nikki Jizz, if some of you are familiar. Katie Bush did the one on the right as a recreation.
Do you want to say a little bit more about this idea of like being outside of the institution? Because obviously all of this, like, you know, queer ephemera, these things that are sort of fleeting objects from, you know, flyers and the card catalog and pins, and obviously there's the GLBT Historical Society in San Francisco and One Archives and lots of other kind of queer archives. But I feel like it's, I totally relate and appreciate the idea of wanting to keep this stuff sort of amongst you all, and also in the space of the more intimate in your homes rather than in an institution where it can be accessed, and just thinking about how inaccessible and sort of elitist institutions are, especially for queer and marginalized folks.
Most definitely. I don't think they're accessible either. And I think that you have to have money or have to have a certain, definitely like an education to get a hold of somebody or someone to respond to you. I feel like a lot of, when I was doing my research, I would look up keywords and I could not find a single picture of a stud button. And I know for a fact that they were donated to certain institutions and there was nothing. So that kind of made me feel a little bit like, why would I do that? And it's like a lot of these places, like the historical societies are, you know, run by volunteer base too. So it's like I can't like blame that institution, but I feel like also like other larger institutions, I think I don't necessarily trust.
In a lot of archives, you know, things are like left unprocessed. It's normal for a lot of your collections to be unprocessed, and also for them not to be sort of tagged or have metadata so that people can find things. So it feels like this really sweet act of love that you all wanted to actually keep it outside of an institution.
Right, and so I worked with a project with Josh Chian of Dark Entry Records, and we did a 7-inch together with Patrick Cowley at what was called White Trash Boom Boom, and Candida Royale had all of her diaries sent to Harvard. And when we were trying to access those diaries, it was nearly impossible. And they said, we'll get back to you in a year. So that's how it kind of goes. So I just was like, no.
Yeah, and strange. So like Beth Stevens and Annie Sprinkle and a lot of these kind of San Francisco really important folks who are involved in like the feminist sex worker health organizing all sent their archives to the Schlesinger at Harvard. And what's kind of weird is when things move outside of their geographic region, it's like people who are there in that place don't have access to it for lots of reasons, but it just kind of gets removed from the context.
Right.
of, where it was produced. So that's totally frustrating.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think, yeah. And then I would like to talk the process about how we did the book too. So I actually got to meet Paul Gidget Sinclair's nephew, Matthew, who looks exactly like Paul, and it was very emotional when I saw him. And I was managing a bar in San Francisco, and Maggie and Chris came to the bar to have their anniversary for their wedding anniversary date. Were you having a date? Yes. And I was telling them the story about oh my God, I just met Gidget's nephew, and it was so special because I feel like a lot of people's relatives are reaching out to me to hear stories, and I'm more than willing to share. And it's I can't some of these stories are not PG, so I don't want to and I feel like they're also personal, so I don't feel completely okay sharing them to the general public, but I feel like it's just a really special thing. And I was telling them about meeting Matthew, and they were and I was just oh my God, this would be so cool as a book. And then it's we jump in.
Yeah, so anniversary was lovely. I yeah, I feel like you were just sort of really energized and invigorated by the exchange. It was within months of the exhibition Queer Visions that Chloe and crew put on at Hay Street Art Center. So it was the sort of swell of energy in that regard. That coming down, you processing that come down, and sort of what's next within this new sort of face in your mix of of history and family, and and I feel like perhaps you were asking what it would be a cool book. I don't know, maybe we could get a drink and talk about it sometime. And Maggie or Maria and I were yo, we'll do this if you want, because oh my God, this is so magic and special. And it just sort of built from there. And it was roughly a year. I mean, it's been a year. It was about a year ago. Our anniversary is coming up, bud.
So how many pins were there and images? And can you talk a little about the process of digitizing or just deciding what to include for the publication and kind of shape the book visually? And
maybe I'll start and then jump to you. So, we were very overwhelmed. There was so much, and the stud is so much. It's intergenerational madness and love and heartbreak and magic. And I mean, we were what the fuck? What what are we? How are we gonna deal with this? And it's not for frankly, it wasn't for us to deal with. So I think after processing for a while, we realized just what was in the boxes. That's our story, and we used the buttons. Starting roughly in what we believe in the 70s. The bigger buttons were in the 70s. By 81, the buttons were starting to be dated, and we could use the dated buttons as a timeline to place the ephemera and create this long visual story. I'm going to pass it off to Maria to talk about the insanity it was to to build this and scan, and because there was.
So when you're creating a book, you have to be obviously, be within a budget and pages, and this was easily going to be thousands of pages, and we had to edit ourselves. And when we decided to do the buttons, it was perfect because it would be. It was like a calendar that just spanned several years. And not only was it historical, but a lot of the buttons had cartoons from Betty Boop or Bugs Bunny or Mickey Mouse. And you just saw time pass in this way that felt very nostalgic. And just feeling them and smelling them and seeing the rhinestones. And also seeing the photo albums, you became pretty emotional. It was like sneaking into someone's room and looking through there's a photo album that has some pretty nude photos, and then the very next photo, and the very next page, it would be his grades from City College.
Along with a Lily Tomlin
Yes.
ticket stub.
Exactly. So I was they gave me the boxes. I cleaned everything up, and I painstakingly took a photo of every single image, and then I cleaned every single button. So I archived, through photos, I archived everything because I didn't know what we were going to use. And we couldn't have everything in color. So we had everything in black, everything in like black and white and in color and cleaned. And then with Chris and Chloe, we just started piecing the story together. And it started changing a lot because we didn't know some of the timelines. We didn't know when photos were taken. We didn't know if the cruise happened before or after this photo. And there was this really sad voyeurism that I felt because I knew everybody had passed away. And I didn't know. I felt naughty sometimes because this wasn't mine. I'm looking at their intimate photos with their partners, and I used to think these men probably would have never thought that I would be holding their nude photos. You know, like the collection of penises and. So that's what we did. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I would say collectively, how long did it take to do just the photographing and the cleaning? Easily over 100 hours. I would spend days and spend 10 hours a day just working on 10 buttons. But yeah, and then the editing came, and that was the funnest part. That happened really quickly.
How many like photographs did you have, and what did you pare it down to, and what was that process like?
We had to keep it within the context of the buttons. It was so easy to want to include more, but we worked really hard at keeping the photos with a button so that you knew there's some photos where you could see people wearing said buttons. And because the other stories were there was just so much information, and it was really hard to pare it down. But
also there were two main photo albums. One was more collage based, if you will, of like more sexually charged collages. And then the other was that was Gay Day, yeah, or
Yeah,
what?
it was Gay Freedom.
Gay Freedom, which was that 69 or 71? What was?
I believe it was 71.
71, yeah. And all these beautiful like pictures of that march and the floats and all like the major players of the stud crew. And within that, there was a lot of repetition and a lot we had to like weed through a lot of photos that just wouldn't translate well because they weren't taken well, and sort of that was a roller coaster ride. But I think we like honed it down to really poignant moments and really candid, beautiful moments.
Maybe you all could talk a little about that, what you were bringing up, Maria, with the idea of the, kind of looking in and peeking into somebody's intimate life. And, I think for the two of you as publishers, and then Chloe for you, like inhabiting the same like physical space as some of these folks and working in the kind of legacy of the bar and what it means to people now, what it meant to people then, how you're sort of connecting with earlier generations, thinking about queer intergenerationality and of carrying that legacy forward. Did you feel a kind of responsibility or?
I felt a responsibility in making this book that I wasn't part of the book. I had to remove myself because it wasn't my story, and I had to make sure that the way we were doing things was in respect to these beautiful men, and that we weren't narrating something that wasn't there. That was really hard, and it was also really important that we did it correctly. We Chloe had to do a lot of fact checking. Like, it was so hard to do it and hopefully we didn't make any mistakes, but considering that a lot of the players are gone, and there's nothing on the internet, nothing really exists. So it was really difficult to verify everything. And I don't know, that was a long question, so I kind of lost it in my head.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, that's really helpful to hear. And I think it's nice that there's like, on the one hand, you have a certain kind of distance, and then Chloe, you have a certain kind of closeness with the project. And I wonder how you kind of navigated and saw yourself in relationship to these.
Yeah, I think it was
folks.
almost easier that I wasn't a member of the stud, because had this freedom that I feel that I was given from Tara and Rachel about just do your thing and we support you. And I felt very grateful for that. And those were the two members of the stud. And it was also really difficult because during COVID, I literally had a room that had all of the stud ephemera, and it was literally 90% of these folks were gone. And it was so difficult to be in the same space. And trying to piece together the history was so difficult. And yeah.
Did you find yourself like going to people's houses and talking to people you'd never met? And
well, no, because during COVID, and a lot of people were immune compromised that were still around, so it would be a lot of email and phone conversations. Even to this day, a lot of them are in their 80s, and we have some stories that we included in the book from them, like Maya Novelli, Diana King, and a few others. But yeah, I feel like we wanted to keep it minimal, and also, at the end of our publishing, like Heclina had passed away. So it was just like really, there's like a lot of heavy things, and it's like, what do we include? Or like, there's so many facets to the stud, and it's like, we didn't want people to think that this was like an overarching, like historical, like reference. And it's like, it is like literally like a moment in time where we wanted to pay respect and like have people not forget.
what were people's reactions, like older folks, as you were coming to them and saying, this is this archival project we want to preserve? And
oh my God, they were laughing. They're like, oh my God, Gidget would love this. They were like just Gidget would be rolling over. You know what I mean? And also, I think that they felt like validated.
that's so sweet. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us some like fun stories and sweet stories of kind of talking with folks who were there at the time, like things that you learned that you maybe didn't know?
Yeah, that Gidget was a real jokester, and I think would just play practical jokes on people. And when a customer was out of line, so the original stud was like on lock. They like had it where they were making money, and if a customer was out of line, they would ring this bell, and a bouncer would just remove them, and no questions asked. And they like were swooped out of, I don't know what door that they were swooped out of, but they were like never seen again that night. So that was like, there's like some really like funny stories that were just, they had it like Sylvester was an angel and Etta James was, a handful. That's,
So we talked also a little about institutions, but also about like being in sort of an amateur archivist. And
Mm-hmm.
I wonder like what compelled you to kind of do this work, because, you were kind of inspired by this encounter in the basement and driven to do this project.
Yeah. And also like I was raised by gay men that had passed away of AIDS. So this was also my tribute to them. Yeah.
I wonder if all the three of you can talk a little about what it meant to kind of put this into the hands of a contemporary generation, because and also maybe you can talk about the stud now, because the stud closed during COVID. Mm-hmm. And are we allowed to?
I don't think I can.
Okay.
I think things are happening.
Okay. Teaser.
Yes.
So the stud did close during COVID, and then had some iterations of like doing work online, and then this book is kind of the thing that it's like a physical, tangible product. A book is very different than a bar, than a dance club, but in some ways it shares these, kind of through lines of like the connection that can happen, in the space of a bar, in nightlife, or when you're at home alone reading in your room, you get these kind of feelings of connection to people and places and times and ideas that are not, that are really stirred up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder if you could talk more about making a book that kind of reflects the sentimentality and the sensibility of that bar space and queer nightlife.
I think maybe I would want to say a book is not a computer or a screen. So just something to hold, and then to hold a moment of history, and particularly one that is I would say like 80% visual. Like it's and like these very intimate and sometimes otherworldly mile markers of these, some tragic, some fucking fantastic moments of San Francisco and like queer San Francisco, and then to be able to hold it and to sort of time travel with it. I can't 100% speak to this, but I imagine for younger like queer folks, like I don't know, to be with that just seems really fucking beautiful. Yeah, I mean like that's people that have chosen to like unabashedly be, and that's something that I think as a voyeur in on these archives and kind of creating my own relationship with it, that's what I got out of it. Like those folks were revolutionaries, like by just fucking getting up and walking out the door, and it's rather beautiful, powerful, profound, and I think coming back to like something you could hold rather than like a screen that lights up and your thumb moves shit around. Like that's, I don't know, maybe I'm just antiquated myself, but I want to hold on to something, so. It could be good.
To me, it was very much as though we were encapsulating a flash of time. It was such a quick flash of time, but when you go through the actual ephemera, it moves very slowly, and that's what I want to preface. We didn't publish a book on the history of the stud. It was literally like the flash of a camera, and that's what these pins were. They were just a little moment of this beautiful space that these men created when men couldn't be themselves. But in this bar, they could. And not just men and women. It was the first inclusive gay bar. And that was beautiful. You saw these great friendships bloom. And we hope we did it justice, and we hope that maybe there's more.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting hearing you talk about how this is not exactly a history of the stud, and I'm wondering like what else came out, or if there's like there could be an oral history with folks, or there's other kind of moments that you have some text that alluded to things, and it was such a special and unique kind of space in terms of being gender inclusive, also in terms of just like being outside of the kind of cultural and kind of the style of the day. Did you think about bringing more of the history into it, or you were kind of like the pins were really the thing for you?
I think the pins were the focal point, but I think it also broadened the vision. And I think with the other ephemera to kind of weave into the story, it created more of a historical view. And I think that's what was the intention. And I think it's definitely, this is not the end of this story, and I think it's just the beginning.
Yeah, I could maybe just speak to like for us, now that we have the book, it feels very much like a seed, and more will come. But in the last year of us processing, going outside of those boxes felt like, frankly, it would have felt irresponsible. And I think that was Maria and Chloe, like all of our like I'll speak for maybe us a little bit more than you, but maybe, I think I'm speaking for you too. Like this, we needed to roll with complete reverence and care, and moving outside of those boxes, like it could have been dangerous or hurtful, and that's one thing that like that it was big. Like I didn't hang out there. I didn't go there. You know, like who am I, and like where are we? You know, like just the responsibility. It felt very responsible to keep it within what we had right in front of us, and and now that we have it, this tangible thing, more stories will trickle in, and
Yeah, it
volume
feels like
two.
it'll become sort of a resource for people. And I like what you're sort of saying about like you had a certain fidelity to the objects that were produced to be worn publicly. Like they weren't intimate photographs or people's letters or stories that you didn't know if you had permission. So a kind of like ethics around the object itself, like you knew was something that you could share. And you just kind of like really faithfully produced that for folks. It's really nice. Should we open it up to comments and questions and feelings and maybe like the best night you had at the stud if you feel comfortable sharing it?
Please, if you have that story, we want.
If we're recording, if you feel like we'll pass it your way. I'm sorry.
This is incredible. Thank you so much for sharing all this. So when you first started showing the images of the pins, I kind of assumed that we would really see kind of reflections of, of
Should I go back? I'm gonna go.
of the times and how I kind of like periodize it, or like cultural historians periodize that time, like the 70s as being sexual and gay liberation, right, and the 80s being like HIV/AIDS and activism, right. And I was surprised actually at like, especially with the references, I think someone said nostalgic, like references like Betty Boop and stuff, that kind of almost like non-specificity of some of the icons they're pulling from and stuff. So I wondered if there were other pins that kind of more reflected those kinds of like, again, the ways that we periodize or think about those times, or if there is a kind of like almost sometimes maybe moving away from like in the 80s, like we have a place for ACT UP and our activism, and these pins are doing something else. So I just wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah, there was pins that were made by Dave Farrell, also went by Artista, and Artista did all of the signage in the stud of like the beer bash and all of like you are welcome here. They also created some pin backs, and one of them was safe sex, and they had a penis and a condom, doing stuff. And there was buttons from that time, but I just didn't have that in my possession to include it in this. So, but yeah, there was.
Cool. Thank you.
But
that's great.
But also, this is just a splash.
Of course.
There's hundreds like in the book, and will
Yeah,
eventually be on like in maybe on a website or what have you. Like then, and there are plenty that speak to what you're
the kind of politics and activism of the moment. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
it's like Poke the Pope, when the Pope visited SF during that time and made no mention of AIDS, and it was like a joke. So there is reference to cultural things.
And then there was the button with the angel that has a very like sort of sad story relating to AIDS.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, I don't want to strangle you. Hi, thank you. That was so beautiful. We're also queer historians, so I'm sure a lot of people are. So we're like obsessed with this. I have a comment and then a question. This really made me think of. There's a brilliant scholar named Margaret Galban who has a new book coming out called Invisible Archives that's about feminist activism in the 1980s, and she says something really amazing. She says so much feminist visual culture from the 80s. We don't really know about it because it's all stuffed in random archives, like the Lesbian Herstory archives, and people don't even know where to find like these comics and visual items. So the book is a recovery of all of this work by different feminists, where she had to go to these archives and like be inventive about finding like Alison Bechdel's original comics before they were collected like in books. And her point is like, look, all of these objects lived in a context. Like the buttons existed in a bar on people's bodies, like moving around. So I would ask you, like you guys did this incredible work of reconstructing the lived material context of these buttons. But the problem with archiving is that it has to then separate those objects from that context. Like that's, the book preserves for us, but it also separates. And I'm wondering if you have advice to people who want to be able to like reconstruct what it must have been like for the button to have a life, like in a room, like what should they do?
Wow. Yeah, so I actually through like the stud, we would throw parties, and so I threw a polka dot prom party as like a ode to the polka dot prom, and I recreated polka dot prom buttons. And so every time we recreated and did a merch, so we also recreated a lot of the pinbacks on shirts. So you'd have that Betty Boop stud shirt from 1985. We recreated it, and it was actually the best merch the studs sold. And so it was just kind of recreating those buttons. And I actually made these baseball cards of Gidget, and I recreated all of the pinbacks that they did. And so, and we like numbered them. And every time we have a merch pop up, we would normally just hand them out. And or like when I was doing merch for the stud, I would just throw them in there as like a hey, here's like a freebie, especially during COVID. So yeah, I think that's how I would recreate them so people could still have them and wear them. Yeah.
And also just like all this effort is like it's a playbook. Like follow it. Go. Like what is it for you? What's your story? Fucking go. Like take it for a ride and create the world that or the object, whatever that you want to wear or see or like be. That to me, like that's what this feels like a point in which to jump.
Yeah, and when I see like people having a stud pin archives or wearing Gidget's shirts in anywhere, I am like so happy. Like it makes me so happy because it's like they're wearing history.
Well, and I think you also talked about the idea of like this ethics of wanting to put out kind of faithfully what you could feel that you could with responsibility, especially because it was hard to connect with people during COVID, and you were also trying to protect those folks who were older and immune compromised and kind of not put an additional tax or like labor on them, and then to know like what you could do and what also was like sort of a next step, in this process, which might be an oral history or another kind of project or a queer history project. So
Right.
Do other folks have comments and questions? Favorite pins? I do also really love the Snoopies and the Betty Boops, and there is the kind of like style of fonts from another better day.
Yeah, thank you all for. Oh yeah, hi.
Oh yeah.
You just mentioned a website. Is there also like an interest in creating an archive online? It would be impossible to do in a book.
So I most definitely, and like so I just went to Instagram. I went to Instagram and I created an Instagram account, Stud Pin Archives, and that's what I did to start it off. And I was like, this is like the easiest, most accessible thing, especially during COVID. And now my work is to make it more accessible for people that are vision impaired. So like fully describing each button and, and kind of creating it like a true archive. And that is kind of the idea is to kind of keep going further with that. And it's like not building a database, but going off a website and kind of just creating it like a database. So yeah. 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 Yeah, right.
That's the Stud Pin Archive on Instagram.
Yeah.
And then any other lingering thoughts or feelings? Go to Q20?
Q20.
Q20 and go buy the book.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you
all
all
for coming.
Yeah.